friends, how are you? Welcome to Changing Tracks. Today we have with us a passenger all the way from Jacksonville. Father Fred is joining us today. How are you, Father Fred? You are very welcome to our program.
Very good, thank you.
Could you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm 71 years old, been a priest 44 years. I was born in upstate New York, Binghamton.
Could you tell us a little bit about your childhood in New York?
My father was Methodist and my mother was Irish Catholic. And we lived in a middle class neighborhood, and Dad was he was the chief clerk at the Erie-Lackawanna Railroad. My mother worked at an electrical company. She was an executive secretary. So they both worked. And my parents obviously sent me to St. John the Evangelist Grammar School, which was at that time free with no tuition. And then I went to Catholic Central High School in Binghamton. And then I went to the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, and I studied journalism, switched to the College of Education.
Okay, so with your dad being a Methodist, your mom an Irish Catholic, how did this affect your faith life growing up? Did your mom teach you how to pray?
Well, she had a great faith in our Blessed Mother. I remember, the May altars at, in May where we'd decorate with crepe paper, and we'd have a little altar, and we'd say the Rosary, my brother and my mother and I. My father was certainly not objecting to the faith. My mother didn't drive, but he would take my brother and I and my mother to Mass on Sunday. And so growing up, I went to the Catholic school, got certainly a good fundamental orientation of the faith. And when I went to high school, in fact, when I was in starting eighth grade, I asked my mother, could I go in the seminary? Because I used to say Mass, as a kid, play altars, play in church, and the funny thing is I had a little Jewish boy as my altar server. He didn't understand all what was going on anyway, but my mother always got a kick out of that. So, but I wanted to go in the seminary, but at the time, they had high school seminaries. And my mother said, no, you're too young. So I went on to college, or high school, forgot all about that, Got dating actively in school, and actually make fun of some of the guys who claimed they wanted to be in the seminary when they graduated. I'd say to the girls, don't talk to him, he's taken. And those guys went in and came out. I went in and stayed. So go figure, But everybody was Catholic at the time. We didn't have too many non-Catholics in the high school, none in grammar school. So you really didn't talk about religion. It was a given. You know what I mean? You didn't have to share your faith with other people because everybody's Catholic. And so even though we went to religion classes, and we had priests and we had sisters, it was always there. My faith was always there, but it wasn't in what we'd call the forefront. You know what I mean? Even though I, as an eighth grader, wanted to become a priest, I got older, it kind of faded off.
Okay, so you said that faith wasn't at the forefront in high school. Did you go on a path away from God then? Or what was your idea of happiness in high school?
I didn't go on a path away from God. I just, God was always a part of the environment, But I think one of the things I used to tell the eighth graders was that I had an opportunity when I was walking home from school. At that time, even you're in your ninth grade or 10th grade, and there were no buses. And so it would take you maybe an hour and a half to walk home. And, the first half hour you'd have friends and they all break off. And, the last hour or 45 minutes of my walking was alone. Didn't have the pod in my ear. They didn't have all that stuff. And it was a great time to begin thinking. But I thought about everything. I didn't just think about God. I thought about everything. And so, like I say, my faith didn't step forward into the forefront, but it was there, but it was a given. And like I say, it was there, but nobody really talked about it a lot.
What were your friends like in high school? Did they have a good influence on you or a bad influence on you?
Well, I had some friends that were going in the seminary, and I dated 2 or 3 years, a young girl that, everybody, it was a good crowd. We're talking in the 60s, and it was a different era then, and everybody there was nobody, problematic in terms of their faith or anything like that. We just didn't see it. We were kind of isolated from that, It wasn't that I had exposure to evil things. It was that faith was out there. It was part of the environment. It wasn't the forefront, but it was there always,
So what happened when you finished high school?
Well, in college, the first time I went to a secular university, and I had, that was in 1966 when I went into college. And I had been living in a bubble when I was in Catholic Central, little town of Binghamton, and I was amazed at what I saw in college. At the time, in the South, the drug of choice was booze and cigarettes. It wasn't LSD and all that stuff. That was going on in other colleges, but not where we were. Heavy drinking and cigarettes, whatever, but nothing, no drugs or stuff like that. But there was a lot of sexual goings on that I was shocked at. I remember going to, at the time you had to drop your date off at 11 o'clock at weekdays and midnight on weekends. And so you had to drop them off to the girls' dorm. And I remember double dating with a roommate, and we're dropping our girlfriends off at the dormitory, and where they had a female house mother, and you had to be in by exactly that time. And this is when I was a freshman, and there were people standing around a car and laughing and clapping. And I said, "What's going on over there?" And they says, "Oh, someone's having sex in the back of a station wagon." I was like, my jaw dropped. I'm thinking, "Are you kidding me? In the parking lot, and kids are watching?" I was in shock. I wasn't anywhere near that kind of stuff at all, but I was in shock to see that you're in a new world now, Fred. You're in a completely different world. Sex and booze was the drug of choice at that time, so it's pretty wild.
How did all of this affect your relationship with God?
Well, at first, being a Catholic in a predominantly Protestant or non-Catholic environment, I remember the first time that I went to Mass and it was a converted Methodist church that the Newman chaplaincy had rented. They hadn't built their building yet. And I got up because in the Parke house, you went to Mass on Sunday. That was expected. Even if you didn't want to, you went, So I got up, set my alarm, and, my Baptist roommate was wondering, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to Mass." And, I went to Mass, and it was the first time that I really owned my faith. But again, it was something that was more of a pattern. It was a part of the environment. You just did it. You went to Mass, and I was taught you're never feeling right if you don't go to church. So I don't think it was as much a relationship as it was living out a pattern that I was trained in. And it wasn't till I got when I was dating the same girl for more than 2 years, took her home to meet Mom and Dad. That's how serious we were. And then we broke up, and then, I went to started postgraduate school, and it was then that those feelings of priesthood came back, and I started, to go to daily mass, not at the Newman Center, but at the church downtown. And it was the first time I began to develop a relationship. It was always there, but it wasn't a constant kind of thing. Going to daily mass and relearning who Christ was, basically. Maybe it wasn't relearning, it was probably being introduced to him for the very first time. The other thing was I was involved in college in politics. Supported Robert Kennedy at the time, that was in 1968. And I was president of the Students for Kennedy, traveled, actually met the senator a number of times, took a group of kids up on a bus to meet the senator and work for the senator in Indiana primary. And then when he was assassinated on June 6th in 1968, it was like I put all my eggs in one basket and the basket dropped. When he was killed, that was, I think, my turning point. That if one bullet could stop everything, where do you turn? And then it was this gradual psychological turn to the Lord. That was a pivotal moment for me. Because, anything that happens in our life, the Lord is always there. He's not going to back off. That began to sink into me. And even when I went in graduate school, and then it was then that I decided that, through prayer, that I at least was going to try it. I wasn't sure that I was going to stay, but I'm going to try it. And I always say, if you didn't try it, you'll never know. And so that's what happened. I remember being on a phone conversation with my parents, and my mother's on one line, my father's on the other, and she said, "You got a job offer at your old high school to teach English," because that was my first major. And I said, "Mom, I got something to tell you, but I'll wait till I get home." And she says, "You can't do that on the phone. You can't. You got to tell me now what's going on. Are you going to marry that other girl that you're dating a couple?" I says, "Hold on. I'm going to go in the seminary." And there was this long pause, we stumbled through the conversation. They had to call me back. About 15 minutes later, my mother said, "Your father and I," the silence on the phone wasn't disapproval, it was shock. We thought that had gone completely out of the picture, when you're in high school. And we're just surprised. But yet, ironically, it was going to a place where people weren't Catholic that I discovered that I was defending my faith, in an environment that wasn't exactly positive toward Catholics. So all of that, I think, factored in. There was the Lord, the Hound of Heaven was very gradually pushing me. Events of my life, all the events of our life, really, we live our life forward, but we understand our life backward. And all those things, the assassination, the breakup, all of that kind of events, there was the Lord using those events in my life to keep pointing toward him. And, but even when I went into the seminary, I wasn't there yet. It was like, I want to try it. And when I got there, the orientation, the first weeks and so, the evening prayer was elongated, we would sing the Psalms, and, then there would be this period of silence, where the prayers of the faithful are normally held. But before we go into those prayers, collective prayers, there was this period of silence. And they lowered the lights and just focused on the tabernacle and the crucifix. And we sat there in our stalls in silence for like 20 minutes. And I'm looking around thinking, I'm thinking all these guys seem to be, whatever's happening, I was like, how long is this gonna last? It was like, it just didn't feel, I looked around and just didn't feel like I was doing what they were doing. And I went to my spiritual director and I told him, I think I'm a closet atheist. He goes, what? I think I'm a closet atheist. What are you talking about? And I says, well, I see these guys and they seem to be deeply in prayer. And I'm not getting this. I mean, it doesn't, I'm praying, but what I'm seeing in other people, I'm not feeling in myself. And he says, who do you think you are? You decided that now you're going to follow Christ, and now you want him to come dance on your shoulder or something. And you have to get yourself into that chapel and you wait for him, like dropping the bucket down the well. Even if it comes up empty, you stay with it. And you just tell the Lord, I'm here, and wait. Because he used to say, you have to have your divine office, your daily mass, and you have to spend an hour before the Lord. And that's the hour that was killing me, because nothing was happening. In fact, I remember one of my classmates sitting opposite me on the other side of the chapel in those stalls against the wall, And he says, you look, really tortured in the face. I mean, you have this awful look on your face. He said, what are you thinking? I says, I'm thinking of getting out of here because I don't feel, I believe in the Lord, but I don't feel it. I don't feel him reaching out to me. I don't, and then one October afternoon, it happened. Something remarkable happened to me. And it's hard to explain, but it was very powerful.
Father, before you tell us this experience that you had, can I ask you to clarify for all watching now how you felt the call to enter seminary if you didn't even have a relationship with the Lord?
Well, maybe it wasn't that I didn't have a relationship, I just didn't have a sufficient relationship with him, I'd always prayed, but I would pray, the rosary or the Our Father, the structured prayers. We didn't, growing up, even in the Catholic school, have a very intense, awareness. We had the teaching about the Blessed Sacrament and the real presence, but we didn't have a strong awareness of that. They had daily mass in the chapel, but never exposition. It was a weird time, post-council and all that kind of stuff. So, it wasn't that I didn't have a relationship, but it just wasn't that strong.
Okay. So now, can you tell us about that experience you had in seminary when you were about to leave?
October 1971, I was in the chapel. I don't know whether I was alone or not. And it was both, I felt that the Lord actually came to me. It wasn't in a vision. My eyes were open, I was facing the Blessed Sacrament. And what my spiritual director kept saying, I'm here. I'm waiting for you, Lord. I felt him both spiritually and almost physically. If you close your eyes and you put your hand in front of your face and your eyes are closed, you still can sense something in front of you. Like a blind person could also know that someone is putting their face in their face, even though they can't see them. My eyes were open, and yet I felt the presence, physical presence. And what I heard saying is, I am here also, and I know you. That's all it said. I am here and I know you. And in the middle of this event, I realized that I was in the presence of the second person of the Blessed Trinity. I was at the same time, I was overjoyed, but I was also a little frightened, like, well, what do I do now? And this overwhelming sense of peace saying, you don't have to do anything. I'm just here with you. And it was a wordless presence. And I can't even tell you how long it was. But I know that when he stepped back, I almost leaned forward and said, don't leave me, don't go now. And it backed away. And I thought to myself, and again, human words cannot express God talk in divine things. I can't express it. What I was feeling and what I experienced in human words, it's hard to explain. But I remember going to, on the afternoon, your classes are in the morning, afternoon, you do your studies, you do your apostolic work, but there are no regular classes. So I don't know what time it was, probably late in the afternoon. I went over looking to tell somebody. And I remember going to a seminarian, and I said this. I says, I don't believe there's a God anymore. I know there is. I just experienced him. And I wanted to tell about it. And from then on, it was like, I couldn't wait to get there. It was like, I knew that I was going to stay. I knew that, for me, that experience allowed me to be in the garden of the resurrection. It allowed me to be in the upper room when Jesus entered that Easter night. All the theology you can have in a seminary does not give you what you need unless you experience the Lord. We read about all these theologians, many of them not Catholic, who demythologizes Jesus and all that, and they didn't have an experience of the Lord. If you don't experience him in some way, some real way, how do you proclaim him risen? Because it's written in the, you're accepting the witness of the people who experienced it, but you also have to do it yourself. You have to experience it yourself. I tell the students the first level of experience of the risen Christ is that you prayed on your own. That's the first fundamental one. No one told you to pray, you just did it. And I know I did that, but this is one of those occasions where Jesus reached back. And he does. He does reach back. And from that point on, now those kind of experiences, I would describe that as maybe having that maybe 4 to 6 times in a lifetime of that intensity. Once more before I was ordained, when I was on the priesthood retreat, and then maybe 4 or 5 times since ordination. That level of intensity of the Lord, is very powerful.
What effect did this experience have on you during the rest of your time in seminary?
I knew, we had an apostolic work we had to do, and one of mine responsibilities was you worked in a hospital staff, and there was a young fellow that was dying, and he was in his 20s, and he had cancer, and he says, how do I know? I says, God's waiting for you, don't be afraid. He says, how do I know that? And I said to him, I know that. I can assure you, I have experienced him on the other side. I know he's waiting for you. I'm not saying I believe he's waiting for you. I know he's waiting for you. And I could say that with confidence and without fear, because of that first event and maybe 6 others to that level.
What would you say to a young person who is watching right now and hasn't experienced this yet, what advice would you give them? Because obviously they want to have this experience, but they haven't had it.
Well, I would say that, just like today's microwaves, your telephone and this room, every room is being bombarded with signals, microwave signals. But if you don't have your cell phone, even if you do have it, if you got it turned off, or you don't have the Wi-Fi, whatever, it's not tuned in. But the waves are constantly bombarding us. I would submit that is what God is doing to us. God is in search of us. The problem is we don't slow down enough to listen. And and God is not a pushy guy. The Lord is not pushy. Remember the young man who said, "What must I do to be saved?" He says, sell everything you have and follow me. And he walked up because he had many possessions. The Lord didn't say, "You need to come back here. Come back here and reconsider it. Or if you don't come back, you're going to be in trouble." He let him go. And I always say he came back later, but anyway. The Lord's not a pushy guy. And if we slow down and listen, be still and listen to your God, he will speak. The environment is being bombarded with God's grace. If we slow down and listen, he will speak. That's what it is in scriptures. And he is constantly reaching out to us, the Hound of Heaven. But if we don't pause and let him speak, he's not going to rush in. Sometimes, I guess Fulton Sheen once said, sometimes the only way God can get to our heart is to break it. But normally we have to slow down and let him enter. As one person said, the human heart is the one fortress that must fall from within. Even Jesus will not break that fortress down. It has to fall from within. Because Jesus to break through would defy our free will. So the human heart has to fall from within.
Father Fred, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for teaching us that in this crazy and sometimes chaotic life that we live, that we have to slow down and to listen to the voice of the Lord. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today.
You're very welcome.
Friends, slow down, stop, listen to the Lord, but make sure you're tuned in to the right channel because he is there and he wants to talk to you. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.